What I wanted to start with was Maslow's hierarchy of needs, because what I think that this fits into the developmental framework that we're going to talk about as the discussion goes on, is the fact that, that we have these basic needs that have to be met in order for us to go on. So when Maslow talks about, and I realized that I made that very small again, that was supposed to be a whole sheet, and I didn't think to do that, because last time I realized that, wow, that's really hard to read. But on the basic needs, we have like the need for food, water, shelter, and clothing. We have to have those basic needs met. And if we have those needs met, we have the needs for survival, the basic survival needs. And then we have need for security, which is the basic need for social security in a family and a society that protects against hunger and violence. The love and belonging needs, as human beings, the need for love and to feel like we belong to something is very strong. And I think everybody can pretty much identify with that, we're not a being that exists totally to ourselves, nor would we really be happy doing that. The esteem need, the need to kind of have to set our own unique identity, self-respect, and enjoy some of the feeling that other people feel good about us too. Experience purpose, like meaning and realistic and realizing all inner potentials. The feel that the things we do well. And as we get that feeling, then we need the need for self-actualization, and that's where we're at, where we look at how do I impact the world in a positive way. And so the reason why I put that up there is because I feel that as we move along this pyramid, we move kind of back and forth. I mean, there's some days that we feel like I'm really doing some good things, and there's other days where we feel like, gosh, I wish I was doing some things better. And so that kind of fluctuates. It's not something that we move all the way to the top and then we stay there. But I think what happens is with young people, and all people, as we move through our developmental stages, it's kind of like climbing the stairs of that pyramid. And as we reach the top, or as we get higher, we start to successfully accomplish some of the tasks that we need to in those developmental stages. Erickson's model is what I'm really going to focus on and kind of walk through tonight and then like the next 45, 50 minutes. The socialization process consists of 8 separate stages. One of the things about the stages is in order to successfully kind of move to that next stage, we have to adequately satisfy the kind of the struggle that's within each stage. In infancy, which is birth to 18 months, we deal with this basic trust versus mistrust struggle. Infants develop a loving bond. They need to develop a strong bond and feel secure in order to successfully navigate this stage and move on to socially to the next stage. During this stage, I think that when we look at young people, where they come from, like the amazing development and the amazing brain development that happens during this stage. When we look at how a baby comes out with, new to the world, they open their eyes and they see everything from for the first time, and all of the things they're going to be exposed to over those next, few years are so important to their brain development, because it's connecting all they're born with all these brain cells, but so many of these brain cells are just there, and none of the roadmap's been laid so that they can access them and use them in meaningful ways. And over the next, over the first couple of years of life, that's happening so rapidly, all of these new connections are being made, that it's important that we do some things to help nurture that. One thing with some of the kids that we're dealing with, is they aren't getting some of the things they need. They aren't getting that touch, that personal touch, or that security that comes from that parental figure that's right there. And so oftentimes when that isn't happening, the young kids will start to develop some negative coping skills. They'll be scared of new people, and they'll be really scared and hard to get to allow them to go to new people. Oftentimes, I think the parents, if we've had any foster parents that have had infants in their home, how they don't tend to respond sometimes the same way as other children have, because they don't feel that security. They may cry, and when you pick them up, oftentimes a baby will normally stop crying right away. But sometimes even when they're very small, they'll have already developed that sense of, well, somebody picked me up now, but that doesn't mean somebody's going to pick me up next time I'm upset. And so, without that loving bond, and that mistrust starts to build in them, and then it really creates some issues later on that we start to see as they get older. Some of the tips that, I thought I wanted to put in here is, I talked about this before, and then I was like, but you got to put some stuff in there about what are some things that can happen, that we can do. Talking to your baby. A familiar voice is very important to them, and then they start to associate that voice with security, or in that voice with the sense of, okay, everything's going to be okay, I'm going to get what I need. When babies make sounds, trying to, responding to them, answer them by repeating and adding words to those sounds, because, at this point in their life, every time they hear a word, that's something new that stimulates their brain. Reading is another great way to help them develop understanding of language and sounds. Singing. I don't know if singing would be good for me. I don't know if I sang to my kids, that might create some problems, because I'm not a very good singer. But playing music, that helps them to, one of the things they found is students the young people, babies that are exposed to music, tend to do better in math, and they develop just an appreciation for music. But there's some correlation there, and I don't understand it. I'm not not a researcher or anything, but seems to be some correlation with music and math ability. Because when they look at scores of kids that play instruments, their math scores tend to be higher than their peers. Praising babies, giving them a lot of attention, spending time with them, cuddling, holding them, helping to reinforce that trust. And then the best time to play with them is when they're alert and relaxed. Watching, really keeping an eye on them, because they will take as much kind of attention as we'll give them, and making sure that we don't kind of wear them out. When they're tired, let them rest. The second stage, like the toddler stage, 18 months to 3 years. One of the big things there, of course, is the toilet training. How do they, working through that. And toilet training, to me, I never saw what the big deal was. And I'm like, well, how could it be that hard? But then I realized that, like, man, my wife did a lot of work. I went to work one day, I came back, and the kid wasn't wearing diapers. And it was like, oh, okay, that was easy. But that's a really critical time, because it's such a, we realize that, wow, that's a pretty complex thing. Anybody with kids realizes that's a big deal. And the thing is it's because, part of it is because of their ages, they're starting to feel, and they're starting to have some more interaction with peers. And so as they work through this stage, they really start to direct their energy towards development of physical skills, the walking, the grasping. In my case, like I was climbing, my kids, it's like this world is like this great big world, and they're like Indiana Jones, and they're out there exploring. And I was sitting there watching a game, and I was like, there's no way he's going to be okay right there. I got stuff around him. I'm watching the football game, and I look over, and he's on the bookshelf. And I'm like, that's not good. And it's funny, because like that thrill, that instinct to climb and explore is so, we develop that kind of kicks in early, and it stays with us. I mean, my kids, a show they love to watch is Everest, where they watch the people climbing the mountain. And I'm thinking, gosh, you guys are like trying to keep you off the bookshelves. were terrible. It's like they love to climb and physically at that age, and it's hard because they're fearless. But it's because kind of one of the things is everything's brand new. They want to see what's around the next corner, what's in the other room. It's so much more exciting when mom and dad isn't there. So let me kind of creep off to see. Some tips for when they're in this age, this 18 months to 3 years, is setting up a special time to read books with them, to encourage the child to engage in pretend play and develop their imagination. The play and parade and follow, that's one thing that's amazing to see kids at that age, how they will kind of just naturally take to that. When you'll see them like marching around, and they'll pick up other kids in the neighborhood as they're going up and down the sidewalk, or if you're at school or something. Helping to explore the surroundings by taking them on walks or rides. I mean, it's just amazing to see them interact with the world. My daughter she made the bridge trip. She's done a couple Mackinac Bridge trips because we lived so close when she was born. She was born in February, and she went on that first bridge walk. And, I just took her in the stroller, and away I went. And as I got to and I thought, wow, how do people do this? Like, take the bus all the time? Because I'm trying to get the stroller on the bus, holding the kid. And I'm like, this is not working. And, somebody helped me out. But she was like, the whole time was just amazed at, like, all the stuff going on around her. Asking them kind of those basic things, working on like their name and age, and just because it helps to get them it stimulates their brain to start responding to questions that they're going to need that later on in school. Songs and just other stories that they can, the nursery rhymes. Because at this age, they're acquiring speech at such an accelerated rate, far more than they're ever going to, not only are they growing physically faster than they're ever going to grow again, their knowledge base is growing really extremely fast too. And so their exposure to spoken, Georgetown University did a study where they were trying to measure what are kids' exposure to words. And so they did this study, and they found that the average child was exposed to between 600 to 2,100 words per hour. And one of the things they found was kind of the exposure to words kind of broke down along some socioeconomic lines. And a main factor was single-parent households. Kids in single-parent households had far less words. They were much closer to the 600 per hour range than the 2,100 word per hour range. And the reason why I point that out is because if you know a single parent, spend some time with them. Go out of your way to just go over and have coffee with them. You don't have to talk to the child. Where this happens, where this exposure that builds vocabulary and has such a big impact on their potential learning is from the words they hear adults around them speaking. And so just go have coffee with that person. Try to find ways to engage them so that their child is going to sit and hear people talking. Because it's just hearing those words and watching people interact that's going to help them as far as their development later on and as they go into school and their vocabulary. One thing they did find in that study is TV doesn't count nearly as much as live interaction between two other adults. There's something about seeing it on that two-dimensional screen, it doesn't engage their brains the same way. And that's one of the things that, that's one thing they're trying to figure out now is like, what's the difference? How comes if they hear a word spoken for me on TV? Part of it is because they're so concrete at that age that they really struggle with trying to differentiate between what's here and what's not here. It's why when you play peekaboo with kids, they get so excited. Or if you hide behind mom at the store and peek at the little guy, he gets so excited every time you pop out. Because when you're there, and he can see you, you're there. But when you step back and they can't see you anymore, it's like you're gone. because it's like if they can't see it, you don't exist. So when you pop back out, you're like, who's this stranger? That's the same guy that just popped out before, but the child doesn't know that. So, that's just a very interesting thing, and I wanted to put it in here. So by the age of 4, that can mean there's like 4 million, some children are exposed to 4 million more words than other children. As they move on, like the 3 to 6, and that piece kind of overlapped both of those, but as they get into this stage, the initiative versus guilt, they're trying to develop, their own way of doing things. And, as you see in there, the purpose is like, what am I doing that, like leading? And so some kids during this time will kind of get to be really self-directed, but at times they struggle with, like trying to be too forceful, trying to do too much on their own, and then having to kind of bring them back in can make them kind of feel like, what am I doing? Am I doing something wrong? So, they're really trying to deal with that initiative versus guilt. How do I be self-directive and assertive in a way that I'm not then getting in trouble and feeling guilty? So really nurturing that in them and redirecting kids is really helpful at this time, because they're already struggling with that the sense of guilt. So we don't want to further push that, because they'll close up. Tips like continuing to read, continuing to nurturing the love for books, letting children help more with simple chores. I mean, that is one thing that you find in that age, is they really want to be helpful. They really want to do some things to help out around the house, and often they kind of want to do some things they're not really ready for. And so how do you redirect that? By engaging them, as like having them help you do something, as opposed to saying, well, no, you're not old enough to do that yet, or just, but how do you kind of bring that out and say, well, yeah, help me with this? Using adult language in there, like using complete sentences, trying to avoid the baby talk, because we want to kind of instill that, that structure as they move forward. Clear and consistent with discipline, modeling the behavior that you want, is a great way to help them to see what they need to do, because they still aren't often able to understand when we'll try to sit them down and say, well, you need to do this, this, and this, and they look at you like, what? Because they aren't able to understand those situations when you put the hypothetical situations out there. They aren't concrete. They're too concrete. They don't think abstractly enough to kind of digest that. So it's important to make sure that we're, clear and consistent with them. Any questions so far? As they get into the school ages, 6 years to 12 years, they have to deal with the increased demands. Now they're in a school setting that they're starting to be evaluated on their work. There's that increased accountability. They're getting work that has to be turned back in. The increasing demands of academics, the rigor in the academics, which is only, which seems to just be, society-wise is becoming more and more as we go on. So it's getting harder and harder for kids to kind of understand that, and it puts those, these pressures on them. And if they start to struggle, often even early on, they'll start to develop this complex of inferiority, and they'll tend to, and usually how kids respond to that is they start to shut down. So they'll decrease their effort if they are experiencing these negative consequences for not meeting expectations. So as we look at that, like, what are some things during this stage we can do to help children develop appropriately? Talking to them about respecting of others, encouraging them to help people in need, helping them to set their own goals that are achievable, so that then there's ways they can kind of see that and track it. That's why one of the things that we do a lot with children that are this age when they're coming into counseling is we'll set up like the point charts, because it helps them to be something that they can see how the progress I'm making, and we set those achievable goals. Making clear rules kind of was brought up from the last one still. Clear rules, sticking to them. being really clear about behaviors, what's okay, what's not okay. Helping develop patience with them. That's one thing, is like, helping to instill that by, like it says here, helping to, letting others go first, or by finishing a task before going out to play. Dealing with that, even tonight, our kids were like, they wanted to go out and play before they came here, but they had homework, and it was like, it was such a battle. But, helping them to see that, because they're getting into that already, where they know homework comes first, then I go outside. But that doesn't necessarily, though, have to be, we also have to have a balance there, because some kids coming home right after school isn't the best way to do homework for them. They do better if they get a time to kind of blow off some energy outside, and then they come back in and work. So not being too rigid in that we set some kids up to fail. If they go out, they blow off some energy, they'll come back in and work great for a little while, and then they may need to go back out and kind of get some more activity. So there has to be a balance there. Doing some things together as a family, going to community events, and that can be very helpful, because so often if you're involved in things in the community, the demands on time, but how do we engage our kids in those things too? The program I run at the school, my son and my daughter go to a lot of school activities, and they really get into them and have fun, so they become family activities where in a lot of ways it's kind of dad's still working, but the kids come with us, because part of the program I do is being out there and being involved in the kids that I'm working with's lives. And so many of them play football and basketball and baseball, so going to their games is important, because then they see me in more than just a setting of working with them because they were in trouble. So I'm in their world. So my son, at 6 years old, this is his second year of being the T-boy at the football game. So we stand down on the sidelines, and when we kick off, he runs out and picks the tee up off the field, and it's amazing, because that's his job. And if the ref forgets and picks up the tee and like tosses it to the sideline, oh man, he gets all upset. Are you going to tell him that's my job? He's not supposed to pick it up. I'm like, it's okay. He won't grab it next time. But just how do you being creative and involving them? If you have a chance to take them to work or take them around the things that you do, sometimes that can be a really good way to spend some time with kids, and it allows us to kind of sometimes get the stuff we need to do done also. Discipline is a way to guide and protect, rather than to punish. Using discipline issues as a teaching moment, so that trying to correct that behavior, rather than just saying, well, you did something wrong, so now the punishment is you can't do this, and we're taking these things away because we want to hurt you. And when that's not our intention, but often it comes across that way, like we're taking these things away to make you suffer because you broke this rule. And we're taking these things away because we want to help you realize that you need to do some things differently. Getting involved in school as much as possible, which is really hard. That's a very hard thing. It's hard for me to be involved in kids' school because I work so far away, and it takes, it's a half a day thing to come down for something and then go back to work. But trying to figure out how we can do it, making that a priority is important, especially at this earlier age, because they aren't able to understand the other demands that we have on us. If you're not there, it's hard for them to understand why. And so as we get, moving into the adolescence, like the identity versus the role confusion, there's really, they're starting to set what their personalities and their identities are going to be for the rest of their life. And so they're here, and their primary focus is a big change is their peer relationships. And one of the things that when we talk to people about this is then they think about like the peer relationships, because up until this point, a huge percentage of their relationships, the kids they've hung out with tend to be kids that are the kids of their parents' friends. So their peer groups kind of has often chosen for them to a large extent. And as they get into adolescence, they start to branch out and set their own identity. They start to establish their own peers. And that's kind of a scary time, I think, for parents. I mean, like I said, 6 and 8, but I'm dreading that already. I'm thinking like, oh man, there's gonna be a time where, their peers are gonna become as big, if not more of an influence in their life than I am. And that's kind of a natural piece. But the thing is that often that kind of stabilizes. Teenagers, they'll get through a period where like it's all about their friends, and then they kind of realize, hey, wait a minute, there's my parents here. And as they kind of reform that relationship, because it's different, it changes along the way. Their relationships with adults in the community will change. Their school relationships, their relationship that they had with the principal in elementary school is a lot different than the relationship they have with the principal in the high school. The way they view that person is different. And so as they work through reforming those relationships, you start to see parents stepping right back into being the big influence in their life. But during those changes, there's definitely some stressors. And their peer relationships are hard because as they start to make those, we'll see things that we don't like in some of their peers. And it's hard to explain that to a teenager that's just going through that for the first time. The romantic relationships, and when as adults we step back and we see what is the big deal. It's like, we see, that relationship ended. There's going to be there's going to be more boys, there's going to be more girls, but that teenager doesn't see it that way. And then it's hard for us sometimes to remember back that, yeah, it was kind of like that. The boyfriend or the girlfriend in 9th grade was the one forever. And when it ended, we were destroyed because we're never going to find anybody that good again or that we cared about that much. But as adults, we know, oh, yeah, you will. That wasn't the one, trust me. But they tune us out when they start hearing that from us, because to them, everything in their body is telling them, yes, that is the one, and their brain is saying that is. So trying to be patient with them as they work through those and supportive of that. And it's amazing because when you talk to them like that and say, I understand how you feel, because to you, all your emotions are telling you that is the one your soulmate. But listening to your parents, when they say it's not, you get upset. And so I have that conversation with kids. It's hard for adults for us to remember what that feels like. And in your brain, that is the one. And we could sit here all day and tell you it's not. And you just think, well, you just don't know what you're talking about, because it is. And I say, it isn't that we've forgotten. It isn't that we don't know. It's just we've forgotten what that feels like. And in your mind, that is. And hopefully you can, you'll believe us that we're not saying it because we don't think that relationship was important. It's just we know from our experiences, the experiences you're going to have, that isn't. And it's amazing how receptive the teenagers can be when it's kind of explained, because they're caught in that moment and, just saying, well, you'll get over it, there'll be somebody else. That's kind of a tough one for them to swallow. So, and so being, really patient with them as they go through the relationship changes is important. Now, any questions so far? I talk way too fast. I can't help myself. I try to stay calm, but I take off. Any questions up to this point?
I think this age too, you know how like when babies are 6 months to 8 months, everybody's like, oh, it's a growth spurt. There's a big growth spurt going on in the brain during this stage as well.
Right. It's huge because and the thing is they're oh yeah, that's right. The question was there's a big growth spurt, brain development early on, but also during teenage years there's a big kind of change in the brain development. Was that pretty close to the question? Right. And yeah, there is, and what's happening is some of the things, the volume of information that they're getting, while it was, we also said earlier, kind of rapidly accelerated, but then when they get into high school, there's a huge amount piled on top of the fact that then they're also, during this time, supposed to figure out what I want to do with the rest of my life. And so when they've got adults that you ask them, well, what do you want to do? And they say, I don't know. And it's like, what do you mean you don't know? You're a senior. But what happens is they're kind of in that process, and until it kind of clicks, they have no idea, and they could be almost there. Because often, how many people have older kids in here, like that have been teenagers, maybe college and adults now, and how many of them kind of went into like areas or fields that you knew you saw it when they were 12 years old, the thing you were like, wow, they'll probably do this when they're older. And then as they grow in it, they have no idea, but you kind of see that personality developing, and so what they end up doing is not a surprise to you, and they're shocked. And in my story, I was a really bad student, and I was a bad kid, and then people say, oh man, there's no such thing as bad kids. I don't know, I was pretty bad, so I don't know how to put it other ways. I thought I knew everything. I wouldn't listen to anybody, and I was always in trouble. But when I go back and when I go back and see some of my teachers and stuff, they're like, wow, so that's what you do now. It doesn't surprise me. And I'm thinking, how would that not surprise you? I was like, I wouldn't pay attention to anything anybody said, and I was always arguing with everybody. And they're like, but we saw that in you. You were always, you might be in the middle of the trouble, but there'd be times where we'd see people come to you to talk to you about stuff. So it doesn't surprise us at all, and you'd give them good advice, and then you'd go do what you told them not to do, but we never could figure that piece out. So, and so they're dealing with so much stuff on top of that. Plus, they're dealing with a lot of other issues that can really affect their development. I mean, one of the things in these teenage years is, alcohol and drugs, and they're being exposed to situations where they have to make the decision, the right choice, without the parent figure around. So, they're on their own in some of those situations. And one of the things is we know how that affects development. And it's not, I didn't put any of those slides in here, but, 12 years old is like the age that a lot of kids first try alcohol. That's like, around the, I think like the average age is like 14 and a half or something like that. And the thing is, it's so scary is because the fact that because of that brain development right at this point, in the sensitivity to alcohol. And so what happens is, they get kind of this double whammy, that the adolescent brain, is twice as susceptible to the damage that's done when alcohol is introduced into it, but yet the effects of alcohol only are about half as far as like the physiological effects. So what happens is young people can drink more and they don't have the hangover on Saturday morning or Sunday morning, but the damage that they did was multiplied while they were drinking because of that brain development. And so we see some pretty amazing structural differences with kids that, with adults that started drinking at a young age and drank regularly as compared to their peers that didn't. Sizes of different regions of the brain are altered. And so tips, I guess, I forgot to get, because I added this one in, but, just talking with teenagers is, being really direct with them. Especially when you're talking about the sensitive subjects that are really hard to talk about, because they need that straightforward honesty. like with drugs, drinking, smoking, sex. Just being honest with them and really direct about your expectations. And the thing is they want those things. The teenagers I work with overwhelmingly say, I want to have really structured expectations and boundaries at home. But they'll admit that, yeah, they're going to fight with them when you say, I want, curfew is 10, it's 11 maybe on the weekends, whatever it's set for, but they want structure. They want those things in place, and they realize they're going to rebel against them, because when you say, no, you have to be home at 10, and they wanted to go to their friend's house and be there until 12, they're going to be upset by that. But they don't want parents to give into it. And so a lot of my work is spent just in those conversations with kids, because I want to try to figure out with each one of the kids I'm working with, what kind of makes them tick, what kind of is working for them. But that's kind of an overwhelming consistent, is they want those expectations, boundaries, rules, eating together. That's really hard to do. I mean, it's really easy to say, but that can be pretty hard to do. My kids would eat at like 9:30, 10 o'clock at night most of the days during the week. But, doing that as much as you can and having time to talk, meeting and getting to know your teenagers' friends, showing an interest in their school life, even as they get older, like that's really powerful to see in that. But getting to know your teenagers' friends, I had dinner with a gentleman last week. He's one of his wife is a committee member for Young Life, so the leaders were going over to their house, and he said, well, my daughter, she had a 16-year-old daughter, and she said she just started dating this year. And so this guy, her boyfriend, they were gonna go to the movies and do some things, and a bunch of friends were over, and so I went and got him out of the crowd. And I pulled him over and I took him over into the other room. So we went and sat in the bedroom and I talked to him. And he said he was scared and I was real scared. And he said, but I talked to him about my expectations for somebody dating my daughter. And he said, I told him that, the average male teenager thinks about sex once every 7 seconds. And he kind of got all red and looked down and didn't know what to say. And he said, and I just told him that's okay. He said, that's the way God made, man and woman to be attracted to each other. That's just, that's how it's supposed to be. He said, but I just want you to know you need to respect my daughter. And he said, and he told him, he said, you can put your hands on her. You can put your hands on her anywhere you want to, as long as it's on her back, above her waist and below her neck. And so he said, when he said that, the kid kind of laughed, and he wasn't sure if he really could laugh, but then he let him go. So they went about their thing, and he said, my daughter told me when she got home that night that her boyfriend had said, your dad's pretty cool. And he said, well, I wasn't sure if I had scared him off forever, because he was a nice kid, but it was just some of those things, getting to know your teenagers' friends. But I think it goes back to that structure. They want stuff like that. I'm sure she had this horrified look on her face, like, what is my dad doing? Oh, but what's he doing? But then she liked that. She talked to her mom about how she thought that was pretty cool that he sat him down and talked to him, because it helps her to not have him to know some expectations, and so that he's less likely to try to do something she's uncomfortable with, and then put her in a place to have to deal with it. So, before we get to questions, I did want to talk a little bit about trauma. This slideshow is really long. I didn't plan on getting all the way through the slideshow. I think that might be why my wife was like, the time, because she was looking like he's only on this slide and there's a lot more. But I wanted to talk about the trauma, just briefly, and then open it up to questions. Trauma, there's two kinds of trauma, both the cumulative and the acute trauma. This is a comparison of brain structure for 3-year-old children. Both of these kids are 3 years old. And one of the kids, as it says, experienced some extreme neglect. And the reason why I showed that is just because we often don't think about how our environmental things affect us. You know, developmentally, there's a huge piece of there's a biological component, but there's also this environmental component to our personalities. So when we experience these things, it can really change the chemicals in our brains. And the reason why I show this is, one thing is you could look and say, well, yeah, some 3-year-olds are bigger than other 3-year-olds. But what this wants to look at is, like, right in this area right here, these quadrants of the brain, look at the size difference. Look how much bigger this brain is, but how much smaller these areas are. And we look at some of the different structures, the edges of it. So it's like, and what happens is, when we're experiencing the rush of chemicals, it's engaging that fight and flight instinct, but there's, you know, often young kids aren't able to get out of those situations, so they kind of sit there, and it really creates some different behaviors, the attachment issues, going back to the little baby that won't kind of take the nurturing and the rocking, and it still doesn't seem to help. But then as kids get older, the ones that won't seem to engage with anybody. Adolescents exposed to a traumatic event feel self-conscious about their emotional responses. And that's really what happens is they feel like there's something wrong with them because they feel this way. I was talking to a youngster, he's 15 years old, last Monday, a week ago. And I was talking to him because the Friday before, one of his teachers had caught me and said, I'm really worried about him because he's kind of checked out on everything. He doesn't seem to care about anything else going on around him. He's not coming to class. If he does come to class, he doesn't do anything. He's kind of just checked out. And I had seen that too in my interactions with him. So I sat him down and I said, hey, you've been through a lot of stuff that you probably feel really confused about and scared about, and are wondering what's going on, you know. But what had happened to him, a little background is, a week after school was out in June last year. It was like the week after school was out, there was that shooting in Grand Rapids where the 2 kids were walking in Boston and Kalamazoo, and the one kid was shot and killed, and the other kid was wounded. Well, this kid was the kid that happened to be walking with his friend when he got shot in the head, and he got shot in the arm. And since then, he's kind of been like, you know, he's had this attitude like, what does anything matter? And I sat him down and I said, you know, you've been through a lot, and I'm sure you're scared. I mean, I said, you're probably having nightmares and things like that. And he's been in counseling, but I don't know if he was struggling to connect with the counselor, because it didn't seem to me like there had been some deep talk about it or any real talk. And I said, well, what you've been through, that would mess up a lot of people. They would have trouble dealing with that, and, you know, having those visions, and it's nothing, you know, wrong with you that you're feeling that way. I said, remember when the policeman was shot a couple years ago? And he was like, yeah, I remember that. And I said, you know, the guys that were with him sit in counseling sessions and they cry. And he was like, really? I was like, yeah, I mean, they went through something and they watched a friend get killed. And it just kind of blew him away that, like, wow, so adults struggle with this too. And it kind of normalized his feelings, because they feel like there's something wrong with me. Why am, why do I react like this when it doesn't bother other people? And so getting him to see that's a huge thing. Anybody that's experiences that kind of trauma, or it's important, but often these adolescents too are experiencing other trauma, like lower grade trauma, but they're the cumulative trauma over time. Repeated issues with, you know, being removed from the house. Mom gets it back together. I come back home. The wheels fall off. I get taken away again. And so even in good times, they can't relax because they're always waiting for the other shoe to fall. And so they live in this state of hypervigilance where they're ready for something bad to happen at any time, and they won't engage with caring people, because that person can be gone just like that. You know, they often experience these feelings of like the expressing of fantasies. at the beginning of last school year, in September, there was a young man killed that was a student at another school, but many students at our school saw it happen. And that was one of the things when we had the crisis room set up, that kids were like, we're going to get them, we're going to do, we're going to get them back, because they were talking about that, and some people would like, jump on them like, what are you doing? And I was like, whoa, time out. First of all, we need to figure out how we're going to do this here, because they need a place to vent. They need to talk about these things, and then we'll talk about, like, if you do that, what is the consequence of that? If you do this, don't you think one of his friends will feel the same way? So they'll have to come and get whoever, one of your friends exacted their revenge, and it just keeps that cycle going. And when you start to talk to them like that, they start to see, oh yeah, I've thought about that, because they're in that moment. Just encouraging, like I said, encouraging them to discuss it, looking at like what do they think could have helped, could have changed those, the event, or like outcomes, what could have been done to prevent it. Like that emotional numbness they just kind of get, because one thing is, there was a study, UCLA did a study, and they did a study on like troops that came back from combat zones where they actually were in combat. They weren't just in country, they were actually experienced combat. 70% of those troops that came back had symptoms that met the criteria for PTSD. And in that same study, they found that 35% of like adolescents that live in urban neighborhoods that are high crime areas also met those. So I thought, man, that's amazing. Almost half as many kids that just live in a violent neighborhood that maybe have never been the victim of that violence themselves experience the same symptoms that a combat veteran experiences. But these are kids too that that often don't they don't have the emotional capacity to deal with some of the everyday things, let alone something like that on top of it. So that's where we get these kids that are in foster care often that will like, it seems like no matter what you do, they try to do something to get kicked out. And in some ways, that's them testing, because they're trying to figure out, what do I have to do? Where is the line at? And that's hard, because we have to but you also have to hold them accountable, but then try to do that in a nurturing way so they see that you're trying to hold them accountable and help them. And it's not about punishing, it's about helping to correct some of those behaviors. Because one thing, we were watching a movie last night. How many people in here have seen The Blind Side? About the football player? I would recommend that movie to everybody. It was a fantastic movie. And one scene that I caught, and it was weird because there was nothing made about it in the movie, but I was watching when he was at the dinner and he was putting the roll in his pocket. So often kids in foster care will do something like that, and it's like, or kids that aren't maybe not in foster care, but they'll do something like that, and then it becomes like, why are you doing that? And so they feel like I'm in trouble for doing it, and realizing that it's a natural instinct for them to say, hey, there's something, and I may need to eat later. So their hoarding food is a survival mechanism that we need to correct. Because what often is appropriate for survival in the circumstances that they may be coming from are going to be things that hold them back when they get into appropriate situations. The running away. In their mind, it's like, I'm not going to get abandoned again. So when you put expectations on them, they want to cut out. It's like you look up and where'd they go? Well, to them, it's like, it's better if I leave, then at least it was my choice. I didn't get thrown away again. And they feel like, oh, if I'm in trouble, they're going to throw me away. And so that's where some of those testing behaviors come from. But unfortunately, when they do those things, it kind of perpetuates the likelihood that placement's going to fail. And the more placements a kid has been in, the more likely the next placement, and more failed placements a kid's been in, the more likely the next placement's going to fail too, because those failed placements reinforce those negative behaviors, those survival behaviors in them that And so, how do we balance that and give them the thing? And it's definitely not our foster parents' fault, because, it's amazing when you watch that movie, you think about how amazing that was, that you would find. I was telling my wife, I said, it's amazing to find people like that. But then amazing to find a couple, because she could have been the do-good person that said, oh, I'm bringing this kid home. And it's like, well, what if I'm there going, no, he's not staying here? And how often that's likely what would happen. But that kid just happened to stumble across two people that were like, she was like, get in the car, and her husband was like, okay, how long is he staying? Or she said, we talked about, but I don't want to give it away for people that need to go watch it. It's required. So the thing is the cumulative trauma, experiencing a prior traumatic event doesn't make a kid more ready for the next one. It makes them less ready, because they probably haven't dealt with all the issues from the last one. And like the young man that I had shared with you, the story, in that August or that September of the year before, at the beginning of the school year, one of his other really good friends, there was a group of about 5 of them that were probably they ran in this group, and they were 5 really close kids. Well, his friend was the one killed in September. And then his other friend gets killed in June. And each time they were all on the way to the same kid's house. And so it's like he was, not only did he have that, but he wasn't even over, he hadn't even resolved any issues from the first one. So they don't make him, it doesn't toughen him up, it makes him more vulnerable. That repeatedly happens. They never have time to kind of get over that, and before there's new ones. They're more likely to have these really intense reactions. The initial explosion, which makes it hard to give them the kind of the support they need, because they explode, and often people aren't ready for that and don't understand it, so they think, well, they don't want to talk to them. When that went on, I had an intern, an MSW intern that year, and she was in there working with a student that she asked her what was, do you want to talk about it? She asked her, the kind of the natural question, are you okay? How are you dealing with it? And the girl just exploded on her, told her, don't talk to me, and went and sat down, and she came to me like, what do I do? And I said, what do you think? What are you feeling right now? She says, I want to go over and sit down next to her and try talking to her again. I said, okay, go do it. And she told her, don't talk to me, but she just sat there. Then the rest of the day, as long as that girl stayed in the room, the girl stayed in there about 4 more hours, she just sat next to her the whole time. And that girl and her developed a really neat relationship later in the year, because once that kind of blew over and she could talk to her, they found out they had a lot in common. So, that's the prevalence. That trauma breeds hopelessness, and that feeling that something bad can happen at any moment and take away anybody that I'm close to. Foster kids, even in a lower grade, have that because they'll get into a placement, things will be going really good, they'll see their life improving because they don't have the chaos that they came from. And then because they do better, they seem to be doing okay, maybe the parents doing better, and then they get moved out of that back to where they're at. And even if things don't fall apart again, they still had one other relationship in their life that they feel like they lost. And it's hard for them to break through and see that people are doing this because they care, not because they're getting paid to do it. Because, that's often the young person's think, well, you're just doing this because you get paid to. And it's like they don't understand. They think we're lying when we say that's crazy, because we definitely don't get paid enough. When nobody's getting rich doing that. And it's hard for them to kind of believe that. I have kids ask me all the time, why do you care if this kid right here that you're bugging about going to class goes to class? Do you know him? No. Then why does it matter to you? And it's hard for them when they're, especially when they've experienced this, to understand how people feel, the empathy that people have for each other, and that common sense of belonging. They really struggle with that because they're so used to being in a defensive mode to protect themselves. And it's just some solutions, spending time with adolescents to, let them know that people care, and that really goes a long ways to combating the negative influence and input they're getting from society. So it makes them feel, that builds a sense of self-worth. If a young person realizes that the reason I do this is because you're important, that's really hard to measure how beneficial that is. Because that's when they ask, like, why do you care? Because they're worth caring about. And that's, you can't, there's no way to weight that. How do you measure that? So just some ideas of ways that, people can, really get involved in all communities. But like organizing tutoring through a local church. If you got a church and there's some people like, what can we do in the community? And they're looking for ideas. Say, what if we went and tutored middle school or high schoolers or something? Oh, and to see how, it's amazing the feedback I get from the kids. Even the high schoolers are like, that's cool, they come in and spend time with us. And the more different the people are, I think the more beneficial it is sometimes. And people say, well, gosh, I was working with a church near our school, and they said, well, most of us, we don't, we're a predominantly white church, and it's a predominantly African-American school. Well, they relate to us. And I said, of course they're going to relate to you, because you're coming in to help them. And they're going to give you the same issues they would anybody else. They're going to push you away to make sure that you really care and aren't just doing it, for some other reason, but that you really want to help them. And then once they see that, they're going to open up and welcome you in. So don't give up on them, because I see that too often is the kids push somebody, and I don't blame them for walking away, because they're frustrated. But then I'll see that kid there the next week waiting for their tutor. Attending school activities, just so that they know the community cares for them. Access to services for all youth, not just urban youth, but all youth. Gosh, it's interesting because I saw this, was like, wow, everybody's talking about funding for education, but it's just like some programs to help educate people and young people on the things that are available to them. So kind of set up to break there. Trust me, I got 20 more slides, but we only got about 10 more minutes. But this is where I had planned on kind of breaking. So questions. There's going to be a post-test going around. I didn't put too many people. Oh, yeah.
When you're talking about post-traumatic trauma,
Right.
adolescents and all, I'm just curious how, if it's not dealt with or if it's worked with, how does that affect them when they become parents?
Mm-hmm. The question was, if trauma isn't dealt with as an adolescent, how does it affect them later in life, especially when they become parents? Pretty close?
Yes.
Okay. Well, one of the things is it's going to make them, because it affects their ability to develop good relationships. So it's going to affect the relationships that they have probably with their partner, the other parent of that child. It's also going to make them, it kind of primes them to worry about like what bad is going to happen. So they stay on edge, never really allowing their kids. Oftentimes, what I see is they don't allow their kids to appropriately explore and kind of take the appropriate risk that that kids need to kind of take, and especially under supervision, because they're worried about what bad is going to happen. And when there are resources, they're real unlikely to engage those resources because they've kind of developed this, I need to protect myself, nobody's going to help me. people are only going to hurt me. So usually they have pretty disconnected relationships with their kids' schools. Often with, the other services, daycare providers. I mean, it's like often it's almost the parent that will just drop off and then pick up and not have any interaction because they still are struggling with developing relationships. Because somebody might be here that's helpful and supportive, but they're doing it for some reason other than to really help and support me. Or if they are, there's something bad could happen and they're kind of stuck in that, and I could lose that at any moment. So they're always on this constant state of alert. So they're not relaxed, and they tend to interact with their kids that way. Sir, did you had a question?
Yes, I just wondered what was the name of that movie again?
Oh, The Blind Side. Yeah. So I mean, anybody else? Any other questions? Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you for coming. Thanks for being interested in this topic. That shows me that there's a lot of people interested in kids and helping them out. And so there's my contact information. If you want to, if you think of any questions, feel free to shoot me an email or give me a call. Anytime. I want to be a resource for the community. So if there's anything I can ever do to help answer any questions, please feel free to call me. Thank you.